Good morning. Welcome to our final session of Skills Sustaining Your Practice. I'm really excited to have our guest that we have today, Karen Atkinson, joining us to talk about taxes. Karen has a lot of experience in the arts in general, but has created an amazing course for us today. If you missed the other two, we have the other three, actually. We have an archive of them on our YouTube channel, starting with Funding Your Practice with Amanda Bradley and Juan Luis Matos. And then we did a session called Understanding Legalese, which I think if you didn't watch that one, you should go back to, because it really gives you a lot of insight about the legal side of the things that we work on as artists with Alan Gins Ayers, who runs Legal Art Link at Locust Projects. And our last session was the business of being shown, where we talked a lot about the gallery world and the museum world and how those kinds of worlds function and what artists should be aware of when they are in these spaces, and a lot about giving artists the autonomy to feel comfortable with asking for what they need. And that was with Leilani Lynch and Abet Yanez del Castillo. So I'm so excited to have Karen with us today. Karen, you're welcome to join us on screen. We are really excited to have you. Do you want to give everyone a little bit of insight about you and what you do?
Okay, so I'm an artist and have been working and exhibiting and doing projects for a really long time. I spent 31 years as a faculty member at Cal Arts and live to tell about it. And I've also done a lot of other things. I've also been an independent curator, started a nonprofit in 1991, ran it for 10 years and gave it to the next generation. The moral of that story is be careful what you start because it's still going after 30 years. So what I'm going to do today is talk about the fabulous topic of taxes, which I know to artists is like, oh, eye roll. But there's some really interesting stuff we'll go over to just make it as simple as possible and to keep you out of trouble. So that's kind of today's goal. You're free to ask any questions in the chat. If they're important, I can answer them right away, or we can wait to the end when I'm finished. But I did a little presentation with some cheesy graphics, which is important when you talk about taxes. So I'll get started. So I'll share my screen. And then.
Oh, and just a couple housekeeping things. I'll be watching the chat and the Q&A. So I encourage you to use the Q&A because we can mark it as answered, but either way, I'll be in the chat. But go ahead and say hello in the chat, introduce yourself, tell us where you're coming from, tell us where you're viewing from. And all right, and that's all I'm saying. Okay.
Okay, so I also, early in my career, I got really interested in artists, actually interested in artists more than the art world itself, I think. I was really watching artists struggle. I was living in a place that there wasn't a lot of support. So I started really thinking about the life of artists and what that means. So in 2000, I started thinking about, I had actually created software for artists to keep track of everything in their art lives and started sharing that. And then I wrote a book, and then I decided to put it on my website for free. So if you're interested, you can go to the website and find over 400 pages of free information for artists. Not a great marketing strategy, but a good activist strategy. So getting your shit together basically was the idea of sharing as much information as possible with artists so that you could actually have a career on your own terms, as opposed to participating in what everybody thought you should do. So I'm a very independent artist. I've done a lot of independent projects, been self-employed all my life, as well as having jobs. So I will kind of go through that and we'll get you straight on the taxes issue. Okay, so this is taxes for creatives. So creatives is pretty wide ranging, visual artists, performers, all kinds of things. And I've included some very cheesy graphics for you just to kind of try to keep you entertained a little bit. Okay, so money skills are really important for artists. And the reason is that you can actually create your own independence. You can set and reach specific goals. And I'm talking about kind of career goals as an artist. You can live responsibly and within your means. And the idea of that is to have enough money to make your work, your artwork. So again, that's why we talk about money skills. So when you think about taxes, one of the things that could be really important is developing a financial plan as an artist. So look at your resources, figure out what your expenses are. If you're interested in a big project coming up, you might need to start saving money. A lot of artists aren't really interested in budgets per se, but budgets can actually be incredibly useful because you know where you stand and what you have to pull together. I once talked to an artist who wasn't keeping track of her expenses for her artwork, and she couldn't figure out why she was broke. And one of the things we discovered is that she was using gold leaf in her paintings and then selling it, which is an expensive material. And instead of keeping track of that, she was selling her work for less than the materials cost. So she couldn't quite figure that out. Another artist was having a tough time, and it turned out that every morning she went to Starbucks for a cup of coffee. So we decided that maybe she should save some money, buy a coffee pot, and get up 10 minutes early. And she started saving all kinds of money. So again, you know, taking action in terms of what you're doing could be smart. It's a good idea to review your progress weekly or monthly, and then make changes as needed. So again, planning ahead is really, really useful. And if it's not working, get help. Talk to somebody, try to figure out what's happening, why you don't have any money, etc. So budgeting helps you live within your financial means. It also keeps track of expenses that you have. Saving versus accomplishing a long and short-term goals. So I've actually put money into a savings account because I knew I had a big project coming up, and I actually wasn't interested in grant writing or things like that. I actually have an article on my website on fundraising without writing grants. I know that you guys had a workshop, but there might be some other materials there that you might be interested in. So trying to accomplish a goal is one of the reasons why you should actually budget. It offers peace of mind. Worry is a waste of great resources, although I'm sure don't know too many artists that have gotten to that point where they don't worry. I think that happens just automatically all the time. So the reason why you should budget your projects, I think it's important to do a budget for every project that you do so that you can actually know that you can afford your own project. So I once had a student who was really excited and came into class and said, you know, I have a show coming up at a gallery. I'm going to make 1,000 1-inch paintings. And the show is going to open in 3 months. So I asked him to go back and do a budget and figure out how much time, because he wasn't just cutting out squares of wood to paint on. He was actually doing this kind of stretched canvas thing for a 1-inch painting. So he came back the next week and he said, it's going to take me a really long time to do this, about a year, and it's going to cost me around $10,000. So the moral of this story is that if this person had sent out an announcement and their show was going to open in 3 months and they didn't have them finished, that would have been a problem, and it would have been kind of embarrassing. So again, do a budget so that you can figure out if you can afford the thing that you really want to do. It'll actually save you a lot of aggravation. You can also create a life budget. I think this is harder to do than creating a budget for your practice in a sense, but at some point, this will be something that you'll actually should really think about. So what's your income versus your expenses? How much does it cost you to be an artist, or how much is your project going to cost you? What are your future expenses? Do you eventually want to buy a house? Do you eventually want to have a studio? All of those kinds of things. You also have to factor in change for new situations. So this is why budgets are never static. They're always changing. So conditions might change for you. I think that happened a lot with COVID. Everybody's kind of lifestyle went out the window and changed. So setting money aside can be actually really useful, and then make adjustments. It could be that you're not saving money fast enough, or you can't save any money at all. You might need to rethink how you go about that. So budgeting to meet your goals. Goals are important. If you are interested in, let's say, acquiring a studio, that could actually be a goal that's really important. So you might actually decide that you need to get a job, or you need to get a second job, or you need to learn how to fundraise or write grants or any of those other kind of aspects. Your goals are always short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And those goals will change. Something will happen in your art career and you'll decide, okay, I need to accommodate this. Maybe somebody, offers you a big show and you have to figure out, okay, what's it going to cost to do that show? Unless they're actually funding you completely, which rarely happens to an artist. So define the resources that you can utilize to accomplish those goals and really look at research options. It's a good idea to kind of talk to other artists too and find out maybe how they pulled something off. Did they get funding? Did they get a grant? Did they just save a lot of money for a long time? Good record keeping is really important with taxes. You need to actually have checks and balances. You need to balance your checkbook. No mind banking, like thinking, oh, well, I have enough in the bank to do this, but you forgot that you wrote 3 checks and then your checks bounce. So it's a good idea to review your counts often. I would say daily, because hackers are now so abundant that it's kind of a problem. So strategies for saving and why. In case of emergency, maybe you need to spend money on a show. You get something really fast and you need to be able to pull all the stops. Take advantage of an opportunity. You can spend money on that show, or to reach financial goals. You want to spend money on a show. So again, this all kind of comes down to your practice. So there's other things to know that might be important that I'm not going to really talk about today in super detail. And these are on the left are some articles that are on my website for free. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this today, how to get a business license. But you also need to know things like bartering and trading laws. What things are tax deductible, what aren't? Billing and collection. How do you collect a bill? The Visual Artists' Rights Act has actually now been demolished. So all these different things, you can actually look them up. So you can do that afterwards. We'll go through a little bit of it. Okay, so there's two things that you really need to know. Work for hire and a freelancer. Work for hire is when you are hired by a company. Somebody hires you. They give you a W-2 form. They take taxes out of your paycheck. The work that you do belongs to them. So it's really important distinction that if you're actually hired, the work that you make actually is not yours. It actually belongs to them. The company or entity pays half of the Social Security and Medicare, and you pay the other half. It's very standard. Sometimes they're retirement benefits. And usually there's a consistent income. So you're working and maybe you're getting paid monthly or weekly. So you kind of know that there's money coming in. When you're a freelancer, it's called self-employment. No taxes are taken out of your paycheck. You pay taxes on the profit you make, and we'll go into that a little bit. You yourself pay self-employment taxes, Social Security, and Medicare. You file a 1099 miscellaneous or a 1099 NEC on untaxed money you receive. So in other words, if you're getting a check from somebody and they're not taking taxes out of that money, you are going to owe taxes on the money you've received, including grants. You're responsible for your own retirement plans, and your income is often inconsistent. So many artists do both. You might have a teaching job, plus you have a studio practice. So you can kind of combine those. The idea is that you really need to understand what being an independent freelancer is and the fact that you need to put money away. So for instance, if you are collecting income, let's say you got a grant for $5,000, you need to kind of figure out how much the taxes will be for that and stash it away somewhere, like in a savings account that you don't touch. Because at the end of the year, when you do your taxes and you're surprised that you all of a sudden owe $8,000, that's not a good thing. So if you're working to make a profit, you are a business, according to the IRS. It's important that if you're selling anything that you have a business license, you can actually get fined and get into trouble for that. The IRS requires you to make a profit 3 out of 5 years. That's their sort of technical term. It's not always necessary if you're a professional rather than a hobbyist, which I'll talk about in a minute, but it requires proof. So again, you know, it might be that you have a teaching job and you're required to be an exhibiting working artist for that job. So then, you know, you might not be selling work. You might be doing an installation artist or doing public or doing all kinds of social practice. And those are a little bit different, but you still have to have a professional relationship. If you're self-employed, you're typically called a freelancer and you're taxed on the amount of money you earn minus the business expenses. So business income can include services that you perform. So one of the things that I do as part of GYST is I will read artist statements for 20 lousy bucks. So I need to pay taxes on the $20. If you get a curatorial fee for curating, if you get an artist fee or an honorarium for a show, if you get a grant, if you sell your artwork yourself, if you do a performance and get paid, if you teach a workshop and get paid, if you do a lecture and get paid. Those are some of the examples. So let's say that you're an artist and you make 20,000 in a year. The art sales are 15,000. You get a grant for 2,000 and you teach a workshop and you get 500. So business expenses can include a lot of different things. I'm going to go through these individually because they're important. But let's say you earn 20,000 in a year, your expenses are 9,000. It means that you owe taxes on 11,000. So again, you know, the amount that you make less your expenses, which I'll go through, means that you owe tax on what's left. Now, the IRS has a rule that business expenses must be necessary and ordinary. So for instance, if you are doing a performance and you go out and buy a dress for $5,000, you have to decide, or the IRS will decide, if that's actually necessary and ordinary. You would probably have to prove why you spent $5,000 and why that particular costume or outfit was really, really important. So I'll go through some of the details. So things that you can take off your taxes, which means that you don't pay as much, is advertising. You can send out postcards. You can do an ad in an art magazine, promotion on Instagram, posters, domain name, website. All those kinds of things fall into the advertising category. Equipment, let's say you buy a kiln, you need a drill press, a laser printer, a computer. All of those things are expenses that can be taken off your taxes. Fees, an entry fee for something that you apply for. Maybe you apply for a residency somewhere and they charge a fee. Application fees for anything. Museum entry fees. You go to a museum to keep up on your research and education. You might do consulting and you get a fee for that. Or you do an artist statement review and you get paid. Insurance. Artwork insurance might be important. Again, always find out if there's any insurance when you do a show, and find out if they're paying for insurance or if you have to pay for insurance, or you decide to, chance it. Liability insurance, particularly if you have people in your studio space, might be important. Event insurance. Sometimes when you have an event, you're required to have insurance to cover what you're doing. So you're an artist, you find a free space to show your work. Again, they might want insurance for that. Studio insurance. If you have a lot of people working with you, that might be a really good idea. Office expenses. You can take off printing, you can design letterhead and have it printed. Postage and shipping, online bookkeeping, software, ink cartridges, copies, subscriptions. All of those things are expenses. If they lead directly to your practice, can be taken off your taxes. Payment to others, performers. You hire performers for a project. Musicians, you hire an installer to help you install work. You hire a photographer or videography to document your show. Maybe you hire a writer to write a catalog essay. And things like bookkeeping, professional fees, lawyers, those kinds of things. Hopefully you don't ever have to pay a lawyer, but it happens. Professional fees, legal fees, tax preparer, accountant, graphic designer, website builder. These are all kind of professionals which you pay a fee to. Those are all tax deductible. You might rent or lease a studio. You might rent or lease equipment. You might have a storage space. The storage space has to include your artwork or what you're doing. You can't necessarily take it off if you're storing your couch somewhere. Or office space. You might not have a studio space, but you might have an office space, which you call your studio because you're just working on the computer. Repairs, your kiln breaks down, you need someone to come in and repair your kiln. Your computer, equipment, studio repair, maybe your roof leaks, something like that. Those are all tax deductible to a certain point. Materials and supplies, those things are used to make your work. So paint and canvas, costumes, silkscreen tools, clay and glazes. Again, everything has to relate to the things that you're making as your work. So you can't necessarily go out and buy something and do something that's not artwork related, like paint your house or something like that. So again, travel, going to meetings. One of the things that's important about this is you have to keep track of your mileage and you have to be able to produce it if you're ever audited. So it's a good idea that if you have to go, let's say, to a gallery meeting, that you actually keep track of that and write it in a small book or on your phone or something like that, so that you can actually prove what you were doing when you claim those miles. If you're delivering artwork to a show, if you're going out of town to teach a workshop, you're attending a conference, taxis, trains, planes, ride shares, buses, all of those kinds of things constitute travel expenses. Meals and entertainment, that's where it gets interesting. You might have a lunch meeting, you might have an interview. Anything that's meals and entertainment actually has to exist to promote your practice. It has to be business related and lead to an outcome. So if you're having lunch with a friend and you're talking about a show, that may or may not be business related unless actually it's promoting your practice or it's helping you to have an outcome in your practice that you would not have. So meeting with a curator might be a good tax deduction, things like that. Or doing interviews, maybe you're looking for an installer or someone to actually help you with your practice in your studio. Phone and internet, mobile phone, the portion that you use for business. So you generally can't take off your mobile phone completely unless your phone is a business phone and it's a separate number from your home phone. Internet expenses, website hosting, those are all necessary expenses. Magazines and books, you might have a subscription to magazines. Those are tax deductible. Books related to business, you might buy a book on accounting or business or research or how to get your shit together or any of those kinds of things. This is also considered part of research. So the idea that you're subscribing to a magazine in order to keep up with what's going on, different trends in the art world, things like that, those are all possibilities. Expenses related to research required to keep your practice going. So for instance, you might actually rent something from a library. You might buy a PDF download. You might rent a movie that's important to know about. Subscriptions and memberships. So you might have a local or international organization membership, and those could be important. Professional development. If you want to take a class or a workshop that you pay for, those are all part of making you a better professional. Lecture fees, consulting, all of those things that you pay for. If you consult with somebody and you have a one-on-one situation, again, those are tax deductible. So it's definitely related to your production as an author or an artist. Any money that you donate to a nonprofit is tax deductible. Now, the important thing about this is if you get something back from that donation, let's say you donate $100 to an organization and they give you a print back from an artist, you have to deduct what was given to you from that donation. So maybe the print is worth $50. So that means that you can take off $50. And most nonprofits will always let you know what that is. In-kind donations such as tools, supplies, meeting space. You might have tools that you've donated because you no longer need them. You have to have a receipt and you determine the value when you make that donation. So again, you're the one that knows how much those tools cost. And so you determine that. And of course, they're supposed to be reasonable. Health insurance, you can take off costs for health insurance, which actually we're all now kind of required to have. Income tax is progressive. So this is an important thing to know, that the more profit you make, the higher your tax bracket. So if you only make $2,000 and your expenses are $1,000, then you're going to pay taxes on $1,000 at a certain percentage. If you make $100,000 and your expenses are $5,000, that's a lot of difference, and you're going to pay a lot more than you would in the previous category. You have to report all income regardless of the amount, even if you do not owe taxes if you're a business. So for instance, you might not make a lot of money, but you still need to report that income. So self-employment tax is a flat rate of 50% right now. So regardless of the amount of profit you make, self-employment taxes remain the same percentage. So again, self-employment tax is specifically Social Security and Medicare, which you are required to keep track of. Now, depending on how much money you make as an artist, it will determine the amount of taxes and whether you actually pay them in increments during the year or you pay them at the end of the year. So one of the things that's important is finding a tax person that understands the arts. There's a lot of artists that have gotten into trouble on some level because they're not really clear about taxes, or the person that they hire does not understand the rules of the arts. So for instance, if you donate a painting to a museum, it's quite different than if, let's say, a collector donates a painting to a museum. The collector can take off the full value of the artwork, but if the artist donates it, you can only take off the expenses to make that work. It's totally unfair, but it's actually a law that's really important. So again, you know, think ahead about those kinds of things. So finding somebody is really important that actually understands it. If you're interviewing anybody, ask them, do you know laws about the art world and creatives and independence and things like that? Okay, so if you're selling anything, it's important to get a business license. Sometimes it's important to get a business license regardless, but what you do is you apply to get a business license in the city or town where you make your work. So for instance, wherever your studio space is located. You can do this online now, and you can do it under your own name, or you can do it as a DBA. A DBA means doing business as, so you can choose a company name. So my company name is Getting Your Shit Together, and that's what I have my business license under. But I could also do it under my own name. It's easy to apply these days, and fees kind of vary from state to state. But again, it's important. One of the issues is that if you're generating income, including getting a grant, and you do not have a business license, the city will find you, or the feds will find you, or the state, because they're all interconnected. And if you're generating income at all, you need to have a business license so that you can actually not get fined and then have to apply later as well. It'll cost you twice as much money. Now, there's a lot of benefits to having a business. And that means that you can take things off your taxes. If not, then you have that income and you're going to pay the full amount that you got unless you take off those expenses. So one of the things you can do once you get a business license is called a resale license. Once you get a business, it allows you to buy things that you use in your artwork at a discount or tax-free. So if you go to a local art supply store and you have a resale license, you can actually ask them if they accept those. You fill out a card called a resale card and they put it on file. What this means is that you do not pay taxes on what you buy, and those things have to be specifically for your artwork. So the difference would be artist A buys supplies without a resale license, and there's a cost involved. Let's say $487, et cetera. That includes the tax that they charge you. Now, what's interesting is that if you're making work and you're selling that work, essentially you are creating something wholesale. So artist B buys supplies without sale tax and a discount with the resale license. So the art supply store might actually give you a discount. Maybe it's 30% off. You go to a paper store, maybe it's 50% off. The difference between these is that artist A paid a lot more money, including sales tax. Artist B chooses less money. Both sell the painting for the same amount. That means that you're saving money, both with your discount and you're not paying sales tax twice. If you sell that painting yourself and you're collecting sales tax, you've already paid sales tax for the supplies, which you're not required to do. So it makes sense to do this, especially if you're producing quite a bit of work. So sales taxes, if you sell the work yourself, you need to charge sales tax. If a gallery or a store sells the work for you, they pay the sales tax. So most galleries, you're selling basically your work wholesale to the gallery. The gallery is selling that work and they're the ones that pay the sales tax, not you. So you're technically a wholesaler. Now, as a business, you can sell retail. And if you sell retail, you collect the tax, or you can sell wholesale to a gallery or a store and they pay the tax. If you are collecting the tax, you need to actually save that somewhere, maybe put it into a savings account and don't touch it. So at the end of the year, you know exactly what you have to pay. There's nothing like being surprised at the end of the year when all of a sudden you owe a bunch of taxes and you don't have it. So there's a lot of different business entities. Most artists do what's called a sole proprietorship. And that's basically that you are the business and you're working with yourself. It still means that you can hire people, etc. A lot of artists now have asked me a lot about LLCs and incorporating. Attorneys seem to think this is a really great idea because they make money. Unless you're making over $100,000 a year, you probably don't need to incorporate at all, unless you're actually hiring somebody to manage your career and they might do something kind of untoward. It's expensive to create an LLC. It requires a lot of paperwork. My advice is to get advice because it varies widely, but don't automatically assume that you should incorporate or become an LLC unless you're actually making enough money to warrant that. So I also want to talk a little bit about fiscal sponsorship. And you might have gotten this already, but this is pretty important. Let's say you're interested in applying for grants, but you can't apply to an entity unless you're a nonprofit. Or you're doing a project and you want to get things donated, or you want to ask for donations. So the way this works is, let's say you have a rich uncle who's willing to support your art practice. Yay. And if your uncle writes a check to you directly, as an individual, they cannot take that money off on their taxes. So what you can do is you can apply to a nonprofit organization, and you can set up what's called a fiscal sponsorship. There's a couple of organizations like Fractured Atlas in New York, which do this for hundreds of artists, maybe thousands of artists actually. And what this means is, if you apply for a fiscal sponsorship, you're then under the umbrella of that organization. That means that they're a nonprofit and they're an umbrella over you. It means that you can then apply for things with, quote, nonprofit status. What's important about this is that if you're fundraising and you're not a business or an entity, it might be really important way to get tax deductions for those people. So you can also go after things that are donated. I once did a project with, and I needed 20 parking meters. I wired them for sound and put them all over the streets of LA. But in order for this company to donate parking meters to my practice, I needed to have a fiscal sponsorship. So I set it up with a nonprofit, and it meant that when they donated those 20 parking meters to me, because you can't go to the local art supply and buy a parking meter, they could actually get a tax write-off. If I did not have a fiscal sponsor, they still could have donated, but most people who are donating want something in return. So this is why a fiscal sponsorship can be incredibly useful. Now, if you apply for a fiscal sponsorship, let's say at a Fractured Atlas, you can apply by project, or you can apply for an ongoing fundraising strategy for maybe an ongoing project. So it can be short-term, or it could actually be long-term. So it's a good idea to think about fiscal sponsorship. So again, just to kind of sum things up, and then I'm going to ask for all kinds of questions, because I know this is kind of a detailed topic. So your income minus your business expenses equals your profit. So it's a reminder that it's like you're paying taxes on your profit, not all your income. So there's some resources here. If you go to my website, you can look up the 400 pages of information. There's also an organization run by artists and creatives called Brass Taxes. And they actually work with creatives specifically to do your taxes. And they'll do kind of one-on-one consultations. They charge a fee, but I think if you don't have somebody or don't have a resource that you know about, or somebody who's really savvy with you know, taxes with creatives, then this might be a good place to start. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the share and then come online and answer any questions that you have for the heck of it.
That was really awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay.
It got me thinking about all the things I need to get done in the next week or so too. So great. We do have a question from Jay. I'm going to round it up to a bit longer, but essentially they say, do I need to bring every receipt I have collected to my tax professional that I assume are tax deductible?
Yeah. So the idea is that you have to prove what you spend. So you can't necessarily do a thing and say, oh, well, I spent $500 and I lost the receipt. Don't do that. There's also a lot of ways to keep track of those receipts. And I think one of the things that's really important is always write on the receipt what you spent or who you met with, because if you get audited, they will come back and ask you, well, what was this meal for? Who did you meet with? What was the reason for that? The shoebox method is probably the least effective method, to just put all your stuff in and worry about it later. If nothing else, at least get an accordion file that has it by month, and make sure that you just drop your expenses in there. Now, if you're on a budget, this is where it becomes really important, so that you have an idea of how much money you're spending for your practice. So it's a good idea to do your bookkeeping minimum once a month. That way you actually know what you spent last month and what your income is. So if you're working toward a project, again, knowing what you're spending could be really important. But if you don't have a receipt, it does not count. Again, you have to prove that your expenses are worthy. So if you are an artist and you're not making any money at all, the IRS can actually come back and declare you a hobbyist. This is not good. If you want to fly to Paris and say it's a part of your art project, but you don't have anything going on in Paris, that's probably not a good idea either. So you can't go to Bora Bora and just hang out on your hammock drinking whatever you're drinking and, call it a travel expense unless you have something very specific going on. So again, the IRS calls it reasonable and necessary. So if it's necessary to go to Bora Bora, then by all means, but again, you can't just take a vacation and take it off your taxes, etc. That's a really important distinction. So yes, keep your receipts, write down what they are. I got audited. I've been audited twice. Once very early in my career. And luckily, and this was before computers, so it was all like hand ledger stuff. And it turned out that they owed me money because I didn't take absolutely everything off on my taxes because I was starting early. I got audited a couple of years ago, and the number of questions that they asked was unbelievable. And the things that I had to prove, they hired, I think, 400 independent auditors in Los Angeles and actually went after anybody who was a small business. So I wasn't the only one, but I actually wrote an article on my website and I include everything that I had to go through with that audit, including all the questions. So if you want to know what it's like to get audited, you can actually go and look that up. It's a good thing to know, but that's the thing that you want to stay away from.
Yeah, definitely. There's also, I was going to say, there's also QuickBooks has an individual online plan that you can pay for. I think it's like something like $6 a month if you pay for the monthly version or something around there, where all your transactions from your account will go straight there. And the benefit of that is if you do have a separate account, whether you have establish yourself as an LLC or not, you can have a separate account that is just for business. Some people just make it a savings. Some people just have like some low or zero cost account that they use that just keeps their finances separate, and they have like a separate debit card. So every transaction can go straight to that QuickBooks account. I was actually talking to a friend while you were talking about that, but all those transactions will go to QuickBooks. And at the end of the day, you just look at the balance sheet at the end and you have everything accounted for in QuickBooks, saved without having to parse through it as much. I know it's harder when you're in the early stages as an artist and you have like everything's coming from your checking account and all the payments are coming in there. You're having to parse through, your Hulu and your Uber Eats to find what was real and what wasn't each month. Whereas with QuickBooks, that would do it automatically. There's also things like Mint, which allow you, Mint is on your phone. Mint allows you to do so on your cell phone. And if it is all coming from one account, you can create labels for each thing. And so each month Mint will be like, hey, time to check up on your accounts, and you can go through and make sure everything's doing it. And after a while, the app's pretty smart and it starts to figure out what kinds of expenses fall under certain categories for you. So it's a little bit less work for you. I'm still, frankly, a bit more in the shoebox method type of way. I have to admit that. I do these things and I'm like, you should do it this way. And I'm like, I'm not even doing it that way. So do as I say, not as I do, 100% when it comes to that stuff.
Now, one of the things that you have to remember is that if you're paying cash for anything, it won't automatically be in QuickBooks. So again, depending on how you buy things or whatever, but it's a really good idea to kind of keep up with stuff. I think that what's interesting is when you're doing budgets and you're thinking about this, if you think about it, it's this really boring, awful business kind of art thing that you have to do. But actually, you can get really creative when you have a budget, because you can actually look at things and say, so for instance, you're going to do a project. I always do a fantasy budget of absolutely everything that I would absolutely love to have in that project. And then when I go to fundraise, I redo that because there might be some things that aren't absolutely necessary, but would be really cool. So again, when you have a budget, you can actually then kind of play with that budget. You might apply for a grant that, you know, funds half of that project, and the other half you go after donations. One of the things I always do is see if I can get things donated before I buy them, regardless. So if you write a grant and get $5,000, and, you know, when I did the parking meter project, again, you know, there's no way to buy a parking meter. So, you know, those elements, if you're doing something a little kind of, you know, off the beaten path, you need to think those things through. Again, this is why a fiscal sponsorship can be so useful. So make sure that you, at least once a year, I mean, once a month, you know, add the things that you pay cash for, just so that you're kind of up to date. Because doing it at the end of the year is a pain.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
As we all know.
I've had to do it multiple times, so I get it. I was actually going to say, so one about the fiscal sponsorship, if you are to get a fiscal sponsorship that isn't an org like Fractured Atlas or Miami Foundation, I encourage you to find an organization that wouldn't be applying for the same things you would be. And by that, I mean, if you're trying to do like an arts programming thing, don't get a fiscal sponsor that is also an arts programmer, because then if there's a grant that they can only apply to once, they're going to prioritize their project over yours because they kind of have to. So it's important to kind of like make sure you find somebody who's a fiscal sponsor that works, or use an organization like Fractured Atlas or Miami Foundation. But I understand that when you use like a smaller org, they might not take a percentage out. Lots of the organizations in Miami used to do essentially fiscal sponsorship with artists back in the day. So there's probably an org that's down to help and to do that with you. So just like I thought. So we have quite a few questions actually. So one of the questions we have, in order to be legally making money and filing taxes as an artist, a business license is what we need. So you're asking, do I need a business license? If you are generating income for your practice, so in other words, if you're an artist and you're in a studio and you're not making anything, you're not selling anything, then you have to kind of think about how you can claim yourself as an artist. So you might have a job that requires you to be an artist, but if you're generating any income at all, the city will come after you if you don't have a business license. So again, you know, grants count, any income that's related to your practice. Now, it's also important to have a business license, I would say, to keep your costs down. Again, if you have a resale license, you don't have to pay tax on the materials and supplies you buy. So if you're a painter, you don't have to pay tax on canvas and paint and all those different things, so that you're not paying sales tax twice. So again, you know, if you're not doing anything, you might not need to have a business license, but as soon as you're generating income, and it might seem kind of kooky to, you know, you sold a painting for $100. I hope that you're charging more, but if that's the case, then, you know, eventually the IRS will come after you, and or the city, because they actually want your business license. So it's an important aspect. Also, you know, you can ask a tax person, you know, if you have some extenuating circumstances about what you think is deductible or not. Yeah. So our next question is from Geraldine. And she says, I think she's might be confused about your vacations mentioned. She said, vacations are not considered if I want to take pics in the ocean and then paint about the ocean. And if I'm not mistaken, I think what you were saying was more so that you can't just write off anything and just include a vacation as that. But if the vacation is, or if a trip, let's not call it a vacation. If a trip is related to your practice, yes, you can write that off. But I think that people, and I will say, I know a lot of people do kind of just I'll write that off kind of as like a throwaway for anything that they don't want to have to pay the taxes on, or they want to be able to deduct from their business. But for the safety of your business and to avoid the risk of getting audited as much as possible, it's best to not put expenses on there that are related and just throwing them in there as a way to kind of like play with the system. Because if you do get audited, they're going to say, so what is the output from that? So what came about from the trip to Bora Bora, Well,
not only that, but if you have a lot of expenses that don't seem necessary, you'll get a red flag, So if you have 6 different trips, like you go to all the oceans of the world in order to understand whatever, you would then have to prove to the IRS why that's necessary. So again, if you're not making any money, and you're losing tons of money and claiming things that don't necessarily relate, that can get you into trouble. So, going through an audit is such a pain in the butt that you don't want to get audited. So if you're going to do anything that's suspect, you might choose not to do that, because if you get declared a hobbyist, I think you can't do something for 7 years or something, but it's not a good thing. So, be mindful of it. If it's kind of like Russian roulette in some sense. If you're throwing something in that might be questionable, then it might be questionable for the IRS as well. So again, you can't just necessarily go out to dinner with somebody and mention art and then take it off on your taxes. If it's somebody who can help your career, or if you're having a serious conversation or an interview, or you're meeting with a mentor, those things you could kind of prove, but you don't want to just put down, oh, well, I had 100 lunches because I thought everybody could sort of help me out. Again, think about necessary and relevant in terms of what you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you. So somebody says, Anik says, I was told that by my tax guy that I can only minus the expenses of materials on sold work. Is that correct? And this person is a sole proprietor.
No. So again, this is a kind of interesting gray area, but so what the IRS wants is they want you to show that you're serious about what you're doing. If you're serious about what you're doing, you can claim all your expenses, but at some point you have to make some money. So you can't go on and claim all those expenses, but you don't just claim expenses for sold work. That's not actually true, unless there's some state law that I don't know about. So for instance, if you are an artist and you always have inconsistent income for the most part, you might sell 2 or 3 paintings in a year. The next year, you might not sell anything. You can still take those things off your taxes if you are spending it in a reasonable way and what's necessary, and you're trying to make a profit. So what'll happen is that if the IRS comes to you and you show them that you're doing all the things necessary to make a profit, then you will be fine. So the problem is these kind of funny gray areas. So eventually, if you don't make money for 3 years, I always make money at least every 3 years. Even, so I don't necessarily claim all my expenses. Again, I had to be an artist to teach where I was teaching. but I also had a lot of other things going on. So again, there's this kind of balance. But if you can prove that you are operating in a business-like way and trying to make a profit, you can take things off your taxes. Again, you might have a job that requires you to be an artist, so you can take those off your taxes. There's a lot of artists who, they're doing all kinds of things they don't get paid for, in terms of social practice or any kind of thing like that. So again, find somebody who actually kind of knows better.
Yeah. Yes. I think that that's where there's a few accountants around that are much more privy to artist related things. And I think that in his mind, I think he's kind of erring on like the safe side, which is like, if you get audited, yes, I sold the piece that I bought this paint for, but it would be kind of too difficult as a business person to parse that out completely, because it's just, tubes of paint and like all the ways that materials overlap just would be impossible to actually break it down that much.
Although I can say that it's a really good idea to keep track of the expenses per artwork if you can. So let's say you do a painting and you use 16 tubes of paint. In the software I have, you can actually keep track of every expense that went into that artwork so you don't undersell yourself. Again, I have a whole article on pricing your work and how to think about that. So you don't want to undersell yourself. If you've bought 16 tubes of paint, you want to make sure that you're paying yourself, etc. So it's a good idea to do that if you can, but you don't need to do that for taxes. You don't have to know exactly what each piece costs, but it's really good for your practice if you're interested in selling something.
Yeah, I agree. So this one, I don't know actually the answer to, and I wonder if you do, is can my service dog expenses be counted in my business?
I don't think so, unless your service dog goes with you to, like, for instance, if you go to a meeting, but you can't take necessarily all those expenses for the service dog off, but you could actually, let's say you need to travel somewhere and you have to buy a ticket for the dog. Those things should be tax deductible, but not just, you can't pay for the whole thing because that's a part of your life more than a part of just your practice. So again, this is where you can ask professionals, but I would say that, if it's necessary, again, necessary and relevant, then of course you can take that off.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's maybe someone can help you in calculating like a percentage of your time that is spent with your practice versus other things and how those expenses are related, assuming that your service dog is with you 100% of the time. So like that could be a way that you can kind of clarify that information. But yeah, that one's like that's a toughie. So now I'm going to go into the Q&A box. So can you, somebody was asking if you can go over sales taxes as a reseller.
Okay, so again, you're an artist and you are in your studio. Maybe you have an open studio event and you sell a painting or whatever. You as an individual are selling that work. So you are basically the store. That means you need to collect sales tax. If you deliver a painting to a gallery and they sell it, essentially you're selling to the gallery wholesale, which is why you don't get the full amount. And that entity is paying the sales tax. Now, if you sell out of your studio, you need to collect the sales tax and then pay the sales tax at the end of the year. If you're making a ton of money, then you have to pay the sales tax quarterly. If you're making an obscene amount of money, you have to pay it daily. So depending on what your practice is, so you as the individual selling it is the seller. So whoever's selling the work is the one who pays the sales tax.
I didn't know that at all. And someone, so I don't understand the business license. Is it just for paying sales tax? Can it be done retroactively, like for the past 3 or more years?
No. So this is why you want to get it if you start selling. You want to get a business license right away. You actually, I think, so there's a couple different things that I've heard, and this might have changed. If you started, let's say in January, and you sold a work and you don't apply for a business license until March, you could probably count that, but you can't go back years and then take off your taxes once they're paid. I mean, I guess if you went to a tax person, then you could make that, you know, but the business license counts for when you apply for it and when you get it. So yeah, you can't necessarily go back retroactively.
So we also have, okay, so you mentioned that after you get your business license, you can apply for a resale certificate. If I have a resale certificate, does it mean I have a business license? I can't remember if it was part of the process. Thanks.
Okay, so the first thing you do is get a business license, and then that allows you to apply for a resale permit. So you get the business license first, and then once you do that, you can apply for a resale permit. But what you have to do is you have to actually put an ad in a newspaper 3 different times for 3 different weeks. And then you have to cut that out and send it back to them, proving that you've announced the fact that you have a business. So for a DBA, that's important. So then once you do that, then you apply for a resale permit. And the resale permit basically allows you to sell and collect taxes. If you never ever sell things yourself, then you might not need one, but it also allows you to buy things at a discount. So I think for artists and creatives, it makes a lot of sense to have a resale permit. It'll save you money regardless.
Yeah.
And sometimes a lot of money.
Yeah, it does. It does for sure. And then so do you also need a business license if you're providing services instead of selling something? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
There's an option for it.
Right. So income is income. You know, as an artist, you might be doing a lot of things. You might have a really special workshop that you teach around the country and you get paid every time you do a workshop. Again, you're a business generating income. So it could be services, it could be actual artwork, it could be selling books, it could be any number of things. If you're, you know, a musician, you know, I mean, again, so all those creative aspects, if income is coming in, it's a good idea.
Yes, and so we have one more question. It's going back to the conversation about being categorized as a hobbyist over time. So is that something that can happen over like a course of a few years, or would that happen like from one year to the next if it did happen?
So what the deal is that if, let's say you get audited and they discover that you are spending a lot of money, but you're not generating any income at all. So you never sell anything, you never do a workshop, you never do a lecture. So it looks to the IRS as if you're claiming things, but you're not really in business, or you're not operating like a business. So that's where relevant and necessary is the key term here. So again, you know, thinking that through is important. So if you're not operating like a business, and the IRS finds you kind of lacking and you're not trying to make a profit, then they can actually declare you a hobbyist as opposed to being in business. So that doesn't, it means that you can't have a business license and or a resale permit. So you're kind of locked out of that. So again, I think one of the things that's important as an artist is to figure out how to generate income on some level. So you can't just necessarily not generate anything and still call yourself a business. So that's where it, becomes important. If you aren't selling actual artwork, think about the other things that you might be able to generate income from. If you're going to, schools and universities and you're doing visiting artist lectures, that's a professional thing to do. So try to think of as many professional things as you can that will help generate, the idea that you're a business, as well as generating some income. So again, it's just, you can't just kind of willy-nilly think about things. You really have to kind of plan ahead and think about, is this relatable? Is this necessary? Is this actually helping me look like a professional artist?
Yeah. Another question was, does the announcement have to be on the internet? Can the announcement be on the internet instead of in the newspaper related to the taxes?
Nope. Now, what's interesting is that when you apply for a business license, you'll actually automatically get something in the mail, because this is how it works now. And someone will offer to publish what you need to have printed. Or you can go to the local paper. But the idea is that you have to have it in print, and the internet does not include in print. So I just had to, since I moved to a new place, I had to apply for a new business license in a new place. And this was a year ago, and it had to be printed in the local paper. So you have to be able to cut it out and send it back. So the internet doesn't really count so far. It has to be in print, like ink.
Very good to know. I would have assumed the internet worked, so that's very, very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, having it on an online thing is not, so far they don't accept that, at least as of a year ago. So, and it means that they have to put it in print, so I think everybody can see it, and not everybody's on the internet. Even if you publish it in some paper that's not, a big deal. So it might be a small newspaper, but as long as it's in print, ink print.
So Regina says, my accountant mom says I don't need to become a sole proprietor. She files a Schedule C for me. Is there different tax breaks that I am missing?
Okay, again, it depends on if you have any income. So if you are in school, for instance, and you're not selling work, etc., then it doesn't make sense to have a business license. But once you graduate and you're actually involved in trying to be a professional, I mean, a lot of people won't show work from students. And one of the reasons is that student work is often collaborative, either between you and the people who critique your work, or you and the faculty member, etc. And then there's some organizations that get federal funding. And then, so there's a lot of reasons for that. So you don't need to be a sole proprietor if you're not generating anything, or if you're not functioning as a professional. So, you don't need to actually pay for that until you're kind of ready to do that. So again, you might be in your studio making a lot of paintings, but you're not showing them, you're not doing anything with them. So that's where the IRS would still consider you a hobbyist. So again, you have to figure out how to generate some income. If you are generating income, though, that's when you should really think about it. If your parents are claiming you and you're not filing your own taxes, that could be quite different. But as an individual who's, working to make a profit, then you do need it. So again, just, you can ask around about that. And again, make sure that, the tax person you talk to really understands the arts and creatives, because the laws are quite different.
Yeah. Someone asked, what is the advantage of a fiscal sponsorship for your rich uncle?
It means that your rich uncle can get a tax deduction for writing you a check. So the difference is that if you're an individual artist, it means you are not a nonprofit, your uncle can write you a check and it is not tax deductible for your uncle or whoever is giving you money. So most people who give money want something in return, and the tax deduction is often what they go after. So, you know, if someone donates money to a nonprofit, that money is tax deductible. Same thing with you as an individual artist. If you're an individual, that person does not get a tax deduction. If you are fiscally sponsored, then you are under a nonprofit umbrella, then your uncle can get a tax deduction for writing you that check. Did that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
It made sense to the other person. Okay, Kim says yes, it was helpful. I think you just essentially answered that one. And then so I think people are still kind of curious about the hobbyist thing, to like, because I think they're a little bit nervous about that. How long can you go without profit, I guess?
Well, according to the IRS, you have to make money out of 3 years out of every 5.
Okay.
Now, again, if you are required to be an artist to have a job, then that changes things. That means that, you know, that's required as a professional, even if you're not selling work. So you can take those things off your taxes. So I get a job and, you know, I have to be a working exhibiting artist in order to keep that job. Therefore, my expenses are tax deductible. So again, you know, it kind of depends on, you know, what your situation is. If you don't make any money at all for 5 years, then the IRS could actually say, you know, are you really in business, or are you just kind of taking these things off your taxes because you feel like it? Again, necessary and relevant. Those things are really, really important. So the IRS can determine what they think you are. If you don't make any money and you're required to be an artist, and you show that you are doing everything that you need to do to be a professional, then you're okay. That you still might get audited regardless. But what you don't want, hopefully, is, you know, you take off taxes for 5 years and you don't make a profit. The IRS will then kind of determine what they think it is. If you're still doing all those things that are required to be a professional and you're attempting to make a profit, or it's required for your job, then basically you can prove that. So, you know, it's just a good idea to kind of be mindful of how you're running your business. Are you being a professional? Are you attending professional functions? Are you doing things professionally? Are you showing work? If you take them off for 5 years and you never have a show, or you never do anything that's professional in terms of being an artist, then that might actually be a problem, which is why it's like, okay, go out and do a lecture, teach a workshop, at least prove to the IRS that you are doing it in good faith and that you are functioning as a professional in the business world or in the art world.
Prizes. Yeah, you can jury prizes. You can do all types of things to like make some extra income that would, if you're concerned about these tax concerns. Is there, so somebody's asking about, like, can a parent do this fiscal sponsorship donation thing? And is there like a nepotism clause? I'm not sure.
Nobody can donate to you and get a tax write-off unless you're fiscally sponsored. So if your parent gives you money, it's considered income, but your parents cannot take it off of their taxes. So no. And nepotism is not a problem. In other words, if you're, you know, if your mother gives you $5,000 for a project and you have a fiscal sponsorship, they can deduct that. That's not a problem. But again, it has to do with whether you as an individual are fiscally sponsored or not. If you're not fiscally sponsored, there is no nonprofit involved. So they're just giving you money, but it's not tax deductible.
Right. So, and the person saying is, can the parent's company write it off? No, because essentially what's happening here is that if you are fiscally sponsored, it essentially means that you're a 501c3, right? You aren't officially, but somebody is sponsoring you so you can have that status.
You can
so when your
operate
parent,
that way.
Right.
Yeah.
So if your parent's giving you $10,000 for a project, they would be giving that money through that fiscal sponsor. And because it goes through that, it will be looked at as they gave it to, say, the Red Cross. The Red Cross gives it to you, and that is a donation, and that can be written off on taxes. If that check goes from parent to artist, it doesn't count.
Yeah. So essentially, when you're a fiscal sponsor, so let's just take Fractured Atlas as an example. Someone can write a check and it gets written to Fractured Atlas. So they get the tax deduction. Fractured Atlas puts it into an account and you can actually get that money when you need it. So basically it's going to the fiscal sponsor first and then coming to you as the author or the artist. And that's the difference. So if it comes to you directly and you're not fiscally sponsored, there is no tax write-off. And unless your parent company hires you or you do something specific, it's also, they can't take it off of their taxes if they're just giving you money for your project, because that's not really their business. If they're making ball bearings and they give you $10,000 and you have no relationship to ball bearings in your work, you can't just kind of make stuff up.
Yeah, basically.
I mean, it'd be nice.
Yeah, the IRS is way too meticulous for that. You can't really do those things. So there's somebody who says, what about childcare costs or travel costs related to caring for a child during a business or research trip? Can those be included as expenses?
So again, you have to be reasonable about this. And so if it relates directly to your art practice and is necessary and relevant, I know I keep saying these terms over and over again. So again, the more that you push into area that's gray, the more you might actually have problems. If you're making money and you need tax write-offs, that's different than if you're trying to create tax write-offs and you're getting no money. You're not, it's not operating correctly. So again, like the service dog question, you can't necessarily pay for childcare all the time. Research is also interesting. It's kind of a gray area. So you actually have to prove that you're doing research that's necessary for your practice. So if you, go to the 7 oceans of the world and you take that off your taxes and then you do nothing with that information, that could be a red flag as well. So you still need to kind of connect the dots and make it relevant. If you have to go to a meeting and you have to hire a babysitter, again, that's a gray area. But I think, again, it has to be directly related to your practice.
Yeah. It's hard. Those types of things are hard. In some ways, it should be like, yes, a hard yes. But with the IRS, those types of things, because there's so many, it's like with more rules makes for more gray areas, actually, in my opinion, because there's like, well, what about this specific thing and that specific thing? And it can be really hard to distinguish between the two. So what were you saying?
What I would do is I would keep track of everything. And then if at the end of the year, it looks relevant and necessary, your tax professional can, if they're savvy, can actually tell you what works. But if you don't keep track of it, then you can't even ask at the end of the year. So you would have to say this many hours or this much money or who you hired or all of those things. You can't just generically say, I think I spent $5,000 on childcare and related to the arts. That won't fly. So this is why receipts are so necessary. Same thing with mileage, if you're going to take mileage off, you need to prove that you did those things. So you have to write it down somewhere. So write everything down, and then later you can kind of negotiate. You might decide that if you haven't made a profit for 5 years, you need to actually not claim some things in order to remain in business. So again, not claiming something is not illegal, but claiming something that's not a part of your practice could be a red flag.
Yeah.
Don't get audited. It's a pain. It can go on for months.
Yeah.
Not fun.
Yeah, that's like the big thing, right? Like, it's like, I think avoiding being audited as much as possible is probably the best bet.
Yeah, it's expensive to get audited too.
Yeah,
it's a lot of time and energy, and
Yeah. So Wanda says, as an academic working artist with a W-2 and required to be an artist, are you still filing using your W-2 and 1099? Does this mean you are filing your expenses for the work done as an artist?
The short answer is yes. So for instance, if you are hired to teach at CalArts or somewhere like that, you're required to be exhibiting working artist. So it's required for your job. So you can actually take those expenses that you spend as an artist or author, because you're required to actually have that to have your regular job. So again, what's interesting is that most artists that I know do both. They have a job, which they call their day job, and they have their art practice. Again, if something's required to have a job, then you can actually take those expenses off. Again, they have to be reasonable and necessary. I'm going to put a big plaque up, reasonable and necessary, in your studio.
Reasonable and necessary. That's like
and if you have things that you're not sure of, put it in an envelope that says maybe. I think there's, you can actually keep track of these things, and then, as long as you're fairly detailed with your notes.
Yeah. So this question, I'm like, okay. So I'm going to read the whole thing because I'm like, maybe I'll be able to answer that. But at first, from Carrie, it says, at first it seemed the resale certification was mainly to not pay sales taxes when purchasing materials. But then in answering another question, it now seems necessary to have in order to sell work or charge for time for anything, and to charge and then pay the necessary sales taxes. So it's not just the business license that is needed. Is that correct? She also mentioned that if you're getting grants too, how does this tie in with a business license?
Okay, so the second one first. If you're getting a grant, first of all, the good thing about that is it proves you're a professional. And so a lot of times grants now require you to have a business license if you get a grant. So you might not have one and you get a grant for the first time. And if that's required, you're going to have to actually prove that to the funder. So again, it kind of depends on your situation. What was the first part again?
Oh,
it's early here.
Let me go back to it. I understand. The first part, let me go down, here it is. At first, it seemed that the resale certification was mainly to not pay sales taxes. Then it seemed like it was related to the selling and charging for work.
So in order to sell your work personally and collect sales tax, and or be able to sell wholesale, let's say to a gallery or somebody orders 50 things that you make, and then they sell it in a store, you need to have a resale license. So basically what you're doing is you're registering with what used to be called the Board of Equalization. It depends on what it's called in each state, but the idea is that you need to have a resale license in order to collect sales tax and pay it. So, but it also means that you can actually get a discount from some vendors, and if they accept it, a resale card or whatever, then you don't have to pay taxes on those items that you buy. So it's actually both. So your resale license allows you to sell and also gives you discounts. So I think it's a good idea if you're buying anything, which all artists buy things to make work.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I actually have never actually done that part, but I do know that for people who buy in bulk a lot or buy a lot of things, it's been very beneficial. So we're actually at 12:30 now, so I figure that might be a good time to go ahead and close up shop. But we got a lot of really amazing questions, and I really appreciate everyone's participation, both in the chat and in the conversation. And thank you, Karen, for this. This was really great. I mean, it got me excited to get everything done that I need to get done for my taxes, honestly. And also just for like better management on a personal way. Like we find ourselves making excuses regularly for what we do and don't get done. And I think that being reminded from time to time of like all the ways in which you can make this easier for yourself for the future is like, oh, right. It doesn't have to always be this last minute thing where I'm freaking out or mad at myself for not doing what I needed to do. So this was really nice conversation and a really good way to kind of get everyone back on track. And although it's, tax season is almost over, but this will definitely help everyone to get jump started for next year, or for those who maybe are realizing there's expenses in there that they can go back and look through and add to their expenses, which would be probably very helpful for your Schedule C to include those things.
So I have a recommendation too. I know that, sometimes the business part of being an artist is the stuff that artists don't like. But I think what's really interesting is that if you're as creative as you are with the business of art and thinking about those ways to solve issues, and be creative about how you go about things, it'll actually be much less arduous. One of the things that I recommend is that so that you're not thinking about business stuff all the time, take one night a week. I suggest Mondays. Nothing's ever going on a Monday night. Do the business of art of your practice, whether it's researching opportunities, whether it's researching galleries, any of those things. Do it one night a week so that you're not thinking about it all the time. Like in your studio, you're thinking, oh my God, I have to do my taxes. If you do it once a week for a couple of hours, you'll be caught up in no time. And this includes the research for your practice in any kind of business related thing. So you're looking for a gallery, do it on a Monday night. You're looking for grant opportunities. You're reading things about professional practices, how to do things. If you do it one night a week on a night that nothing is going on, then it actually frees your mind to make your work the rest of the time. And then you never get caught up in the last minute part. So, if you're making sure that your receipts are documented and all those things, then you're not waiting until the last minute to do things. And it'll actually make you much more productive as an artist. So think about, doing it a little at a time and do the fun stuff about researching, well, where can I find money? Or, read an article about fundraising without writing grants on my website, or, all those kinds of things. Anything that goes that'll actually support your practice, do a little at a time and, keep it bunched into this like one night so that you're not like having to fret over that stuff. It'll make your practice much more fun. And we all want to have a little fun. So that's really important.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Karen, for all of your advice.
Thank you all for attending.
The presentation. It was amazing. I'm so glad everyone was able to come by today. And there'll be an archive for anybody who wants to rewatch this session. And please check out Karen's website. There's so many resources and articles there. And Karen has had such a long career with, done so much work for artists in the communities around the nation. So I really appreciate having you here. And also, I really hope you all go look into more of what Karen has done, and definitely look at the GYST Inc. website. I put it in the chat, but I can also send an email later that gives you another reminder of all the stuff that we talked about today so that you can check it out, including Mint and all of those things as well.
And it's free.
Yes, it's free. So definitely use it.
Important.
All right. Bye, everyone.
All right. See you all.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.